started, I don't have a camera on this computer.
Oh, that's rude.
I know. I definitely don't mean to be ducking out here, but
You should send me a photo and I'll just put it on my screen.
that's what I'll do instead.
No, I'm joking. How are you?
Oh, I'm excited, and if I'm totally honest, Stephanie, I'm trying not to feel nervous. I feel I'll just be really, really honest. I feel intimidated. I feel surprised that you're willing to take the time to talk to me.
As you should.
I feel very much like I don't want to waste your time. I hope I do a good job,
Listen, I have a feeling you were prepared well. There's no wasted time. When it comes to exploring different ideas, and you never know in an interview where these things can go. So I'm in it. I'm happy. I'm just sitting at home. It's not raining for the moment, which, by the way, let me close my back door.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. I guess it's that season down there in the Upside Down, isn't it?
Oh, listen, it's been raining here since early November. And I don't know what news you catch in the U.S. unless you watch something like PBS NewsHour, but we're used to fire, drought,
all the extremes,
floods, all the extremes. But the weather system that's been in for the last week, I would say, we don't even have language to describe what's happening. The flooding from all the way up in Queensland down into New South Wales now, it's extraordinary. It's unprecedented. It has never been seen before. And so we're in the mix of that. I'm good. I'm kind of near the coast, so I'm a little bit more protected from that. And I'm not on the coast, so I don't have to worry about my house slipping into the ocean or anything.
Right, yeah.
But I mean, just 30 kilometers from me here, people have had no phones, no power, no water, no food. 30% of all of the meat packing or meat producing places are all underwater now. Half the crops have been totally destroyed. It is horrendous what's happening here. Between that and Ukraine, and we just lost our most loved cricketer this morning at the age of 52 years old to a heart attack. It's a little heavy over here.
Yeah. And I've got to imagine if it weren't for the conflict in Ukraine, we'd be hearing more over here about the current weather situation there. Yes, I'd imagine, especially after the fires, you've got to be worried about landslides and stuff too.
Well, exactly. And it takes so long in these events to recover, like the fires in 2019. Those people are still years away from recovering. The floods in 2011 up in Queensland, it's only been a year and a half that they've actually gotten everything back together now, and they've just been wiped out again. It's unlike the tornadoes. My brother lives in Kentucky, so I follow the tornado tracks down there. But it's kind of they're totally devastating, but they're in a relatively small window or frame, line. Where here the floods are just, they can take out everything.
Right. It's not like the tornado that touches down one spot and then lifts off and touches down somewhere else.
Exactly. So this is, you've got 1,100 people missing. You've got still missing. Man. You've got not enough. And almost all of our services are volunteer here. Yeah. And these people are absolutely fabulous coming together as communities. But, we need a different model for these kind of events, given they're occurring more regularly. So, so, it's been a few sleepless nights paying attention. And of course, everybody knows people in all of these areas. So we're, you're constantly checking in on people or getting messages back of what people might be needing or worrying about people we haven't heard about for several days. And it's a wild situation. We need nothing else to deal with, I think, mentally for a while.
We need a break, right?
Exactly. Where are you located?
I'm in Utah.
You are? Where in Utah?
Right about in the middle of the inhabited part of it anyway. I'm sure you're familiar with Provo. That's kind of the second where BYU is. So I'm in a city that's kind of a sister city to Provo, just north of it, called Orem.
Cool. That's a beautiful area where you are.
Yeah, I sure love it. There are a couple of mountains here in particular behind my house that I'm in love with enough that it makes my wife jealous. So couldn't get away from these mountains.
Fair enough.
But
yes, go ahead.
This is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Stephanie. I've got to know you through your books in maybe a backward way. Maybe it's not surprising because of what I'm talking to you about being piping, right? But I went from piping, then back to training on how to learn, and then back to live interviews, and so I was surprised to find out you're not Australian yourself, in part because I was reading your books and there are S's where I expect there to be Z's, right? And so I thought, this Australian lady, has a lot of great things to say. And then I hear you talking without an Australian accent and I go, now wait just a second. Where are you from?
I was born in Connecticut and was raised there. See, I've been here so long that I forget I'm American as well. And it really only comes out in my accent. It's, I think I have a broad Australian accent, which of course makes everybody laugh, but I can't get rid of the American accent. But raised in Connecticut, went through my early school there, spent a few months then in Phoenix before going back to Connecticut. And that was all until I came out of high school. And then after that, it was down south in the military in Alabama and Georgia, and then up in New Jersey. And then my career kind of took off. So that's, I've been everywhere since then. And, but I left the US in 87. So I've been here for 35 years.
I see. So when you're talking about like the weather events you're experiencing there in Australia, at this point, you don't feel like, when you first go to a new place, you still feel apart from it. And so you would say they are having a hard time here. But at this point, you are saying we are having a hard time.
Yeah, we are having a hard time here. For sure. Yeah. I mean, in 35 years is, I only spent 10 years of my adult life in the States. So, my dominant life experiences have been down here in Australia.
So if I asked you where you're from, I mean, would you be far more likely to say Australia than Connecticut?
Oh, no. I mean, what happens is, I can hardly go a day where if I'm traveling around Australia, people don't ask me where I'm from.
Sure.
When I say I'm from freshwater, they go, no, where are you really from?
Yeah.
Yes. No, you can ask. I'm definitely, certainly was raised in the States and had good experiences up until I was 30 years old. So
yeah.
I don't mind that at all.
And I mean, I don't live in Australia, of course, so this is an outsider's point of view, right? But it seems to me like the culture of Australia is it's like such a recent colonial heritage for a lot of the inhabitants there that maybe a foreigner, said with air quotes, is kind of comfortable in that place, because it's kind of like, how many of us are not foreigners? You know what I mean?
Yes, or don't feel like you are, for sure. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but we're certainly way up in the top of the list of multicultural societies here. So it's that's very much embedded, and of course, we probably accommodate that better than they do in other parts of the world, and yet we can still always be doing more with that.
Sure.
Because don't forget, this is a British colonial country,
of course.
So it really has kind of still that deep roots of patriarchal societies and the way our government runs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's far more deeply ingrained than it is even in the US. It's changing, but it's much more rooted in the UK system than it resembles the US in any way. Yeah,
well, it makes sense. Now, Stephanie, do you have a preference for how you like to be addressed? Do you prefer Dr. Burns?
No, Steph. Just Steph. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you can say whatever you want in the introduction, but then it's more comfortable to banter back and forth in an informal way.
I don't know enough about the art of writing or speaking to know how it is, but I do think that I have tried to read like generic self-help books before, and that I feel patronized. Is that the word? Patronized? Infantilized often,
Yes, don't do that. Don't read any more of this.
But your books don't do that to me, and so there is something about this that feels personal, it feels like Stephanie's talking to me.
Yes. Exactly. And I would never recommend anybody buy anything on the personal self-help bookshelf, with only a few exceptions, because, oftentimes these people are not experts in their field, or in that field. Number two, so they've grabbed onto little nuggets, and they've pared it down to absolute prescriptive, the 3 keys to successful happiness. There are no 3 keys to successful happiness. There's no 3 keys to anything, right?
That kind of language is conspicuously missing from your books.
Absolutely, there's none of it in there. And if I use some sort of like quip, like a one-liner where people write me and go, God, that should be on a T-shirt kind of thing, and I've got lots of those. But it's been backed up by it's that as the end result of a logical presentation of the theory.
Sure.
So there's an idea that says, I think Einstein used to talk about this, but you go through the complexity to the simplicity. So meaning you have to be smart enough to understand the complexity of something. Richard Feynman would be a great example of that, the great physicist. You go through the complexity, understanding it well enough in order to be able to make it simple and speak of it in layman's terms.
That makes sense.
What those personal development books do is they tend to not know any of the complexity. They just go around the complexity.
They skip straight to the quips.
And they do that because it sells. Let's face it. If I wanted to, which is why I've turned down all the offers to write kind of books that would end up on the New York Times bestseller list. I certainly have the capacity to do that. I have the content to do that. But what they do with your work to minimize it and bastardize it is, to me, reputation killing. I'd rather never, ever produce work like that. So that's just personal choice. It's not everybody's choice, but it's mine.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Like, and I can see how, I'm trying to remember now, I think it was in Move Closer, Stay Longer that you said something like, both procrastination and proactivity are learned behaviors or something along those lines? Persistence. That's right. Yeah. So there are quippy things, sure. But like you say, you then explain why, right? You then give us an explanation behind it. It's not just that.
And it's an explanation that is universal in the way that we can all grab onto it. We've all had parents or caregivers who kind of installed these messages that we then kind of internalize and move forward with in life. And so, there is, that book's on the back end of the PhD. So that's 5 years of work.
Yeah.
And a hell of a lot of teaching afterward. Many, many years of teaching to try to get to see if I could make that message understood and applicable. And could I then strategically get people to shift out of procrastination behavior? And in the new book for the piper, and that's not really for pipers any longer, but for the musicians, procrastination and persistence piece is done pretty much in full in that book, because that's where it comes up. If you've been playing for 10 years and you're kind of settled into it, you're probably not procrastinating very much around practice and getting the band and memorizing your music, etc. But those first 3 or 4 years for a beginning player are hell. It's procrastination that probably kills 90% of them off, because they don't know how to manage that natural instinct to avoid things that are uncomfortable. And it's really uncomfortable when you first start learning to play. It's a really challenging thing if you don't have your mindset right. As a matter of fact, in that book, which is for adult beginners or for people who are coming back to music, I would say, somebody said, well, what kind of strategies are you going to teach beginners? I said, there are no strategies for beginners. It's all survival. Right? So
it's all survival. I love that.
90% of that book is mindset work.
Yeah.
90. Where the other 2 books, probably 30% is mindset, getting their heads right, and then I get into teaching. Right. Yeah. No, this other book is what am I going to tell a beginner about how to practice? It's I just need them to go practice every day. I don't care what they do. So,
that's one of the things that has stood out to me as interesting, and that I wanted to ask you about, Stephanie. Okay, so maybe to set this up, actually, maybe I could orient the listeners just a little bit more, if you don't mind me asking you some more biographical questions.
Now, wait, okay, answer this being, so are we interviewing now and you're going to edit?
Yeah, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I just thought maybe you might be getting over your nerves, and then you were going to go, I'm ready.
That's about right.
go. No,
Yeah,
I mean,
partly because of my inability to like ever feel settled about like having put something together well. The way that these episodes have mostly ended up happening is the interview kind of fades in around the time when it starts to feel like an interview is happening. You know what I mean?
Well, so. and you can use all of this. I don't mind this. I don't mind an hour and a half, or whatever, of just bantering, because useful things will come out of that for sure. And by the way, you did ask in your email if you could use that story and use from artistry and training. You certainly can do that if you feel appropriate. So anyway,
thank you.
Kick off and get us oriented, and we will continue on.
Yeah, well, so this is one thing that I'm sure you've thought about before. I'd imagine you probably have. For people like me, most of us in the piping and drumming community, we probably are thinking of you as the lady who writes great books for pipers and drummers, right? Yes. But you do a lot of other things, like it's almost like if somebody had heard of Winston Churchill, but as a painter. Right. And they're like, oh, yeah, the guy who does watercolors. Right?
Exactly right.
He's done some other things.
I know. I mean, it's really funny. Because I tend to work within a community. I like, the pipe band community, what it offered me in what I wanted to thought I could give to music or people who play music, was what it gave me was a huge demographic worldwide. From 11-year-old kids up to 80-year-olds, men and women, and people at every grade of playing. So that is a massive demographic in order to put this work forward. And so, yes, people in the pipe band, that's all they know. It's like I got born and then I just did this thing. Born at 60 and I decided to do this. But there are other people. I mean, I'll get an email from someone saying, "Oh, are you still living in Italy?" It's like, really? Or how are your horses? That's another
right. One, yeah, that's what I keep thinking. Like, for others, you must be the ballroom dance lady or the Italian lady exactly or the horse riding lady. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And really, like, I don't belong to any of those other communities, but I've got to imagine that what you've done for them is similar to what you've done for piping and drumming. And so it seems like, yes, this is a lifetime of work, it wouldn't be surprising to me if all of your work had been for the pipe band community, but no, there is a lot more. But one of the things go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
Just I have wondered if what has your experience been, if like, I'm just thinking to myself, like, as you've gone through these experiences of like kind of diving in deep to learn new skills and to become a part of a community, like, I'd imagine it seems like what ends up happening probably is that you uncover like principles, like core principles that are applicable in a lot of different situations. But I wonder if you're talking to a piper, is the first metaphor that comes to mind a horse riding metaphor? And then you have to think to yourself, okay, now wait a minute, this isn't a horse person. I've got to, so the principle that's behind that horse riding metaphor is still true and applicable, but now I've got to translate it to piper language or into Italian or into ballroom language or whatever it is.
Now, those things kind of happen quite naturally and quite organically. I mean, this work's been growing probably since the mid 80s for me. Excuse me.
No problem.
And so as I get smarter or saturate into more kind of complex development things, more things bubble to the surface and are being kind of carried forward. And there's lots of times, like I've spent the last 2 years just really bringing everything back together again. But I find that I might not use a horsemanship metaphor for a piper, but so much of life is universal. Be it struggling, losing a job, challenges that people have faced, etc. So I oftentimes have a bag full of kind of generalized universals that would work in any group I was working with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's not uncommon for me to use an example out of the time, like move closer, stay longer, right? Like that's centered in, I use the horsemanship thing as the backstory to carry the theory and practice forward.
Yeah.
Otherwise it was just going to be too dry. But I guarantee you 10 times more people who are not horsemen have read that book and used it.
Yes, that makes
And
so
they've
much
used
sense.
it to like learn how to swim, or they've used it to learn how to drive over a bridge, or how to ask for a raise, or to move cities, or to perform on the pipes. You know, it's like the books, while they're embedded in a community, are easily understood by people outside of that community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that, you know, I mentioned that I feel a little bit nervous talking to you, you know, a little bit like you're, you know, I feel like you're rather above me, very polished, you know, and
Just practice. I'm probably older than you, and I've been doing this a long time.
But one of the things that kind of humanized you for me was opening up, move closer, stay longer, and seeing like, so for me personally, I'm not a horseman. And honestly, I'm terrified of horses. They're huge. They have big mouths. They could stomp on me. And you admitted that you also were afraid of horses. You know, you had to get over that. And I went, oh, he's a human like me. You know, and it feels a little bit like well, those moments of you being willing to say, I was not born proficient. Right? Like I went through the process, and now let me talk to you about the process, right? That's kind of what this is all about, right?
Yes. I mean, all of the stories in the books are true. Sometimes they're kind of multiple characters or stories or events that have been brought together into a story that makes a point. But all of the personal stuff is absolutely, you know, right out of the journal, right out of my memory, there's no sense not doing that. You can't. And I'm not like cheesing them on by going, well, I was afraid of horses too, that's why you should listen to me. It's like, no, this is like a real life lived thing. And I spent 5 years trying to sort this thing out for Pirelli, which in fact then ultimately helped the other students along the way. That's where the book came from. So that was very real.
If I were to wax poetic as I was looking at that book, it seemed to me like you might say that the principles and sort of like the elementary core important things that Stephanie is trying to get across are placed in a saddlebag. And then the horse is the vehicle that delivers it to me, the reader. Because like you say, if you just gave us the principles, maybe it'd be too dry, right?
It is.
And so you utilize story as like this vehicle to get the principles into our heads.
And, you know, just like the pipe band books, like that Move Closer book, I was saturated in that community at that time. I was working with Pirelli, kind of redesigning their educational materials. And to do that, I needed to be a student so I could see what the experience of their educational materials would do to me as a human being. And so I was so involved in that community that when it came to write kind of the practice, the theory and the practice and strategies for persistence and procrastination and fear, I wanted to write it for that community. They were the ones sitting in front of me every day. It was like a gift to write that book for that community, as opposed to writing it as a generalized book. And it is the same with the 2 books that have already come out for pipers and drummers. That work relates to anyone trying to learn anything. But I'm saturated in the community and felt like something I could do for that community, specifically for all the things they're giving me. You know, it was a way of giving something back. And,
like not only do you use like our lingo, you know, you're clearly one of us in your writing, but you also, it's like you're willing to make yourself the guinea pig before prescribing anything, right? You're going to go through it yourself and then say,
absolutely.
You know, and I think that's part of that lends to the sort of like genuineness of the work as well.
Well, because there's kind of a cycle for me. So I will have several years of doing research that's required for me to think through a problem that no one has solved before. So there's that phase. And then when I start to really get a grip on the theory, it helps inform kind of the practice or the strategy, what you would do about it. But that needs to be tested. Now, in my work at the moment, a lot of those tests, like with the drumming, that's a 10-year process, right? You cannot ethically ask subjects to come along for 10 years and do anything. So, you know, I have to do it first, and see if what I've come up with works for me. Now, if it works for me, then I'll grab 10 human beings and I will ask them to volunteer time with me, 6 months, a year. and I will test whether it works for a more general group.
Yeah.
If that works, then I will start to present like a piping hot summer drummer. Like, I'll do the whole school there, or the pipe band school in Germany. I'll do the whole school there, because I know now that this stuff works 100% of the time for 100% of the people.
Yeah.
Once it's there and I feel like, yes, this is solid, then I will write about it.
And you get those. I love the style of having other like really great pipers and drummers, people who I would recognize, kind of like in conversation with the book as I read it. That is so helpful. It was
what sparked all this off was I was attending the schools for my own skills, and I never intended to do any work in the pipe band community.
Yeah.
At all. That was not an intention. I was doing this to say, okay, I'm looking for a 10-year complex development project, and I want to do this just for me. I don't care if anyone knows I'm doing it. And I thought, okay, I'm just, so anyway, long story, I ended up with a rudimental drum instructor here in Australia, and he sent me off to the Australian pipe band summer school after 4 months of playing of all things. And I went down, and Bob Worrell was there with pipes. Keith Orr was there on drums. I mean, it was like all these. I didn't know who any of these people were. Yeah. But anyway, a guy. This is the story in the memory book. A guy virtually came up and said on the first night, "Oh, I've been told to come and talk to you."
That's right. You thought you were going to have anonymity there, huh?
Anonymity. I thought 10 years, no one's going to know me. And you have to know in my life, that's like priceless for me to be in a world where nobody knows who I am. And of course, he comes up and says, and I've been told you could help me. And I said, first thing I said was, who told you that? Yeah. And he pointed to a guy who had been a student of mine like 20 years before. And anyway,
you can't get away.
No. And his problem was memorizing music, which really wasn't. And I asked him why. He said, it's because I'm getting old. I knew that wasn't the problem. Yeah. I offered to meet with him for dinner, give him a 20-minute thing on, memory strategies he could muck around with overnight. When I went to the dinner, there were like 6 other old men. Yeah. And I say, because they were all older than me, right? Yeah. Going, me too, me too. Yeah. I've got this problem as well. So we did that, and then the school heard about it. Then I lectured the next day at the whole school, and that word just spread like wildfire. Yeah. When I would go to a school. Yeah. I'm coming back to the story of the guys getting in the book. So when I would go to Piping Hot, as a drum student, they would ask me to lecture to the school. And it was in that second year, maybe, or even might have been in the second year I was there. What I noticed, because I would run around and sit in on like beginner and advanced piping and drumming classes when I had time, just to see how teaching was done. And, it was amazing. If a student on that day asked that question of Jack Lee absolutely had the magical solution. Mm-hmm. But I started to realize if you weren't in that class on that day when that student asked that question to Jack Lee, you were never going to hear it. Mm. So I said to Steve McWhirter, who's my teacher, I said, listen, this is insane. These guys are never going to write, ever. Yeah, it's just not what they're going to do. And all this knowledge and quality of development that they do with pipers and drummers, it will be lost.
You see a whole library go away with them. Huh?
I know. And there's nothing written in the pipe band world. If you go to a conference in any other subject, anywhere in the world, what's outside the door? The book table. Books. Yeah. There's no books in piping and drumming. Yeah. So I just said, listen, can I get 15 minutes with the 4 guys to make a pitch, and if they go, they go. So I did that, and it basically was like, I know the theory, I understand development, I understand learning strategies, I'm a good writer, and I'm willing to write if you will add your anecdotal stories in. So if something I've written goes, oh God, that's right, I remember when I had a student like this, or when I was a kid, I used to just give me the stories that pop out of your mind based on reading. And they all said yes. So that's how that started. And now I won't do that for the 3rd book, because it is for anyone playing any musical. I no longer
sure, that makes sense.
More people want to play the cello and the flute. other such
they deserve your attention too. We'll share you with them.
They do, and yet every piper and drummer who's read the other books or who knows me they will feel like I'm still talking to them, because that's kind of still who I'm writing it for.
Yeah.
It's just I feel like now I'm being a little bit silly, not expanding this to. Otherwise I get emails. Well, I want to learn to play the guitar. Will this help me? It's like, I don't want to get 50 billion emails like that.
just get the book out there so they'll leave you alone.
Just get it out there. And it'll be guys like you that'll help me do it, because as you've seen, and through all the work, I don't promote anything.
That is one remarkable thing. Yeah. I nothing against my friends who do produce things and promote them heavily, right? Totally fine. But I've never seen an ad for any of your work. And yet, of course, I know about it because everybody who comes in contact with it is an enthusiastic disciple of your work. Like it spreads like gospel,
And that's what I want. I want people who come in contact with it to have their reference point, someone they trust. Yeah. Who's read it and has found value in it. Like I care those books, even Great Lies We Live By, which I wrote like in 1994 or something. That book still sells every month.
That's the next one on my list. I still haven't read that one, but just from the title, I love that title. That's a classy title.
Yeah, so that's a book I'd like to rewrite now that it's 30 years later. And it's not because anything in it is wrong. I just know better how to write what I want to do. And that will, when I finish the fourth book, which will be the performance book, because that's going to be a nut to crack. I've been working on that for 5 years now. But when I finish that, I've got all of the transcripts needed for the Great Lives We Live By book kind of sitting there ready to go. I just need that mental capacity to do that. Like I said, there's so much now. I see what I learned in the books for the pipers and drummers finally was how to teach in a book.
Right? Sure. Having done so much really like conferences and stuff, it's different to sit down and write it. Huh?
Yep. I can get students anywhere I want to go if I'm live. Yeah. But to write in a way that paces the reader, one gets their head straight first. And then on from that, when I say turn your page over, then they'll do that.
Yes. The memorization exercise. Right. Yeah. That when you talked about the picturing the word as being like a neon sign and things like that, right? Or actually, now I can't remember if you said to picture it like a neon sign or if that was my friend Mike who brought that up. Yeah. That's how he did it. But you mentioned using different colors for the words and stuff like that. And as I'm reading the book, I'm turning the pages when you say to and stuff. It feels much more like a conversation than like a book. Yeah. It's a unique experience to read that style for sure.
Because if I couldn't crack that style, I couldn't have written the books, because people would have read the books, gone, "Gee, I like the book," and never done anything with it. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not willing to write anything that can't produce the result I could produce face to face, and that means so when I get emails back, it's like, "Holy smokes! I just memorized the first part of my very first tune," or I just did my very first recital because I felt confident that I knew my music. It's like, that's what I want to hear. Yeah. And when I hear that, I go, yes, I've rung the right bell, but it has taken bloody 30 years to crack how to write like that for me. Yeah. And there's not even a lot of models that I could follow, going, who else is doing this? Richard Feynman, the physicist, has done that brilliantly. And, but nothing in my own area or field. So
I'm not super well read myself, so it's not like I would be a judge, but this is, I certainly have never come across, I read a lot of novels, and so I guess I wouldn't come across something like this, but Stephanie, your personality is so delightful to me, in that you are so gung-ho about throwing yourself. You are the only person who I know of who would say what I wanted was a 10-year long project, that would be difficult. I know. And I've heard you talk about just deciding to write with your left hand, and while learning Scotch Gaelic or something, right? You're going to learn it by writing it with your left hand. Has this always been a part of you? Like when you were a child in Connecticut, were you a kid who would look out the window and think, what could be hard today? I'm going to go do that.
Yeah. And no question about it. And I can be, no, I'm not ambitious in any sense, and I'm not competitive. I'm not achievement oriented. I don't do anything to going, I'm going to go achieve this. I do it because it just fascinates me, and I'm curious, and I'm probably a little bit obsessive about certain things and within my own domains, because they make me smarter about things. My mind then is always activated, getting insights that might be then useful later to share with other people.
Yeah.
But even as a little kid, I mean, and I would say that most, if I look at the drivers, most all of it centered around language of some sort. So if I couldn't read it, I wouldn't stop until I could. My dad used to laugh that I used to carry medical books and technical books around with me, and he'd go, I know you can't read that. And I would say, I can't read it yet. And then it was like he'd help me nut through vocabulary and so forth and so on. But that's language in anything. And so that's what got me into the military and engineering, because somebody had shown me engineering schematics, and I thought, what in the world would it feel like to read this? Like, I know there are human beings who look at this and it makes sense to them.
Right.
And I want to know what that feels like. So, and it was the same thing with two-handed piano music, same thing with math, science, all anything technical, brain images or maps of the brain. It's like, there are people who know what this says. I'm not going to stop till I know what it says. And when I know what it says, I may do nothing with it, but I know a little more than, the aim, I suppose, for me is, I always joke, is going to bed at night knowing something I didn't know when I woke up, So, and these projects are long, I'm not, if I'm going to dive, used to be projects were 3 to 5 years. Now the projects are, even longer than that, up to 10 years. And, you just go, okay, how many 10-year blocks do I have left on the planet, really?
Yeah.
To dive into the things that interest me.
Well, and it feels like, at least, this is me on the outside looking in, but it feels like I would imagine that it probably, it looks kind of like what you have is like multiple large, like multi-year projects that are projects unto themselves, but then it's all fitting together into this puzzle that is a big project itself, which is it fair for me to try to distill it into something simple like adult learning? Or is it more teaching, how to teach? I'm not, or are they the same thing? I don't know.
You're right. I mean, it's a lot of tributaries coming into like building this bigger tunnel. And I wouldn't have even known what it was until probably 20 years ago, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But as I have matured, it seems to come, I think there are a few big branches. One is certainly how to teach effectively, which means, because you need all this same underlying theory, you need to understand this instrument. So if we have one foundation, how does this instrument work? How does the brain and the nervous system function as an instrument, and what can you do with it? Yeah. How fast can you make it? How strong can you make it? How articulate can you make it? I'm interested in the development of the human system, but not in a generalized way. That's why, I'm working with you today. I'll have a 15-year-old kid tomorrow working on some bloody weird thing for school, and a 60-year-old person who's trying to figure out how to get back on her horse after having had a traumatic event. And then I'll be in a corporate setting with a senior team at a bank. And, it's because my work is so grounded in harder sciences, biology, neurology, physiology, etc. I'm working with more how humans are alike than how they're different, which gives me a lot of power to walk into a horsemanship group or a motorcycling group or an Olympic Taekwondo team or whatever it may be, and be effective with them. So the threads to me are really around development. How do you develop this instrument to do what it's capable of doing? And that obviously then is, if you're a teacher or a coach, how do you know what I know in order to affect the changes in your own people who are around you? Yeah. I don't feel like I personally even had like a concept of like continuing adult development beyond like the age 18 in terms of like biology and psychology and all kinds of things, until like I accidentally stumbled across like some work by people like James Fowler and people who've built on his work that it's felt like I guess, Stephanie, what I'm saying is I don't know how much of this is my own ignorance of it,
But I wonder, do you feel like your experience in that field of like, even being willing to consider the possibility that adults continue to develop and learn beyond 18 years old,
Right.
was this field of study, in a very broad way of speaking, well established when you came into it? Or do you feel like, because for me, it feels like humanity as a whole is only just recently, within a number of decades, becoming aware of this?
Sure.
And like, are you pushing it along in some way yourself?
Well, I am in the ways that you see, represented, but again, not popping out into the generalized field of being a spokesman for that. But when I first came in, this thinking still was that the adult brain didn't change.
Yeah.
Now, there was some evidence that it was likely. So we had some hypothetical understanding. But in my world, because I'm more a practitioner, a more applied researcher, it baffled me that I could take a group of adults in the morning who couldn't do something, and by the evening they could.
Yeah.
And then by the next morning they could do it again. Now, that to me said something has happened. The brain is changing. Fundamentally, they are building new networks. Mm-hmm. There was no technology to enable us to see that process happen. So we had to wait really until coming into, say, the mid-90s or so, until we started to see evidence of the changing brain in adults all the way through their lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, people like me grabbed onto that literature because we were looking for the theoretical underpinnings for what we were already doing. And to have it be grounded in hard science, not grounded in, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe kind of, it used to be like, you'd have 20 potential theoretical underpinnings for a particular practice, but this cut this down to like one. And what that did was it enabled people like me to refine the practice. Like you look at memory strategies, like I taught in that book, they've been taught for bloody 3,000 years. And not changed. So the practice of teaching people to memorize new things has been around forever.
Yeah.
And so the practices have not changed, but our understanding of how the brain is doing that has changed, which allowed me to then refine those strategies specifically in the area of music, which is, was the focus of that book.
Yeah.
So it is, but on your point, culturally, listen, I can listen to a news program or, something on TV every single day that still talks about being too old at 30 to go back to school. I want to throw up every day. I throw shoes at my TV.
Yeah.
Because the culture doesn't get this. It's like, and the critical thing now for me and why I'm banging on about this is that science has gotten very good at keeping us alive. Really. Like average lifespans going into the 80s, many people living into the 90s, etc. That means from the time you say hit 60, you might have 30 more years on the planet. Science is going to is really good at keeping you alive. It doesn't care what condition you're in. Doesn't care if it's in an aged care facility in a bed. Doesn't care whether you're on a walker and can't take care of yourself. And there is no reason for people to fall off of that cliff and have 30 miserable years. They're just not. There's way too much evidence, and there's way too many people who in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are still firing on all 12 cylinders. It doesn't say you don't age, but in the things you age, it doesn't stop you from doing 99.9% of the things you want to do. Look at David Attenborough or Ruth Bader Ginsburg or anyone you look up to as being wise is going to be in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Yeah. So when I see so many people who drink the Kool-Aid that at 50 and their knee is sore, oh my God, I'm aging, so I'll stop doing what I just did.
Right. Now it's time to sit still and just wait for the end, right?
Yeah. I mean, that line, use it or lose it, came up in the 1950s by a female neuroscientist. And that is absolutely true. Absolutely. So I'm kind of gearing up. I do a lot of work in that space now in groups that ask for that work. But I probably, if I ever were going to make a generalized contribution on the planet, it would be to write to that community who's 40 and 50 or even 30, 40 and 50 years old today.
Yeah.
And the decisions they're making now, because they got better odds of living a long time than a short time. Like, it used to be great. Like, my grandparents and great grandparents, they went off to work, they did their career, they retired at 65, and they did a hobby for 2 years, which was great. And then they died. Perfect.
Yeah.
That was perfect.
But now if you do a hobby for 2 years, you still got 18 more after that, right?
Yeah. And then you go, okay, well, now that's happened to me at 50. It's like, well, now what am I going to do?
Now what?
I'm 54. I still got 25 years. But now what am I going to do? It's like, okay, good. I learned to speak, and write Italian fluent. Okay, now what am I going to do? It's like, after a few years of doing that, it was like, Burns, you really, really need to think this through. It's not, your hobbies will not sustain you. It has to be something vocational, has to be a career. It has to be, what can I do in 30 years? And that's why, like, at 58, it wasn't hard for me to pick a 10-year development project. Mm-hmm. So I figured, great, I don't want to end this in 3 years and wonder what I'm doing. Right?
Yeah.
I'm tired of that. Let this take 10 years and then I'll still have 20 years to use it.
Right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I encourage so many people in their 50s and 60s to go back to university, because it only takes 5 to 7 years if you're going to go for a PhD. And then you've got 25 years to use what you just learned. And you're smarter when you're older than you ever were in your 20s.
Right. That is the thing that I feel like I've only ever heard it from you. The idea that adults have better brains than kids. And
how sad is that?
It's like, that sounds revolutionary to me. And I think to myself, it's too good to be true. Are you telling me my best days could still be ahead of me? I thought they were over. You know what I mean?
I know.
But then you have things to back this up, like the guys you're talking about who were all like, no, I can't memorize music. Or that great story you tell about the group of women who were like, we can't remember anything. You're like, okay, let's make a list of all the things you can't remember.
I know.
Like, so you don't just say these things, you're backing them up, and you're able to point at things and say, no, look how long it took you to learn to read when you were a kid, right? In fact, but that makes me think of this guy who I heard talking about having worked with you, that really, it felt like a big deal. His name is Alan Parker. I don't know how much you know him or how much you work with him, but I'd heard this interview with him where he talked about how, like, for a lot of his life, he couldn't read. He was like below like literacy, basically, right? Like what do you say? Like 50 words a minute, but very low retention as well, or comprehension. Yeah. And he did like some eye exercises or something that improved it, but he was still like 100 words per minute and hardly any comprehension. And he said in like 1 week of working with you, he went to like 1,200 words per minute and 100% comprehension. This is well into adulthood,
Yeah.
And like, if I pause for a minute and just, he mentions, I don't know, he seems like kind of a reserved guy, and I only listened to him for like 5 minutes, so I don't know him personally or anything, right? But it seemed like you could see as he was talking about this, like just trying to put myself in his shoes and imagine what would it be like to live for decades in the developed world without a real ability to read. What are books? Their opportunities, their time machines, their passports. He is like, would have felt so shut off, right, from what other people are able to do. And he says that when he came away from it, like he's asked, like, what worked, like what did it, and I'm not quoting him perfectly, but he said that something like, what Stephanie's program did for me is it helped me to understand how I learn. And to value that. Yeah. And it just made me think, like, on a different scale, right? Like I can't comprehend like the huge turnaround that this guy has experienced, right? But the small epiphanies that I've had as I've been reading your work, like how I learned to play piano, being very sequential and mechanical, like so different from the way that I look at music now, just having read a couple of your books, it feels like, well, honestly, Stephanie, maybe I don't know where exactly I'm going with this, like how to put this into language, but this feels like a big deal, and like maybe it can be a bigger deal for certain people because of where they're coming from to come to it, but it's applicable to so many things, and like it opens up opportunity and hope and these new experiences introduce you to new communities and like the value of having a community. Like we have people in our pipe band who didn't start learning until they were well into their 60s.
Exactly.
What would they be doing if they didn't have this community of people and something to go work on and stuff like that?
And that's the stuff that floats my boat. I mean, Alan's story, and I've then went on to know Alan for decades and still know him today. We even taught a bit together, and he would say that was the transformational moment in his life, because on from that, he read everything, he studied, he went back. He started teaching. He works with OECD countries. He's a big deal in Australia in many, many contexts. But there would be 100,000 Allens in my world, and that was it wasn't. I never cared what people did with it. I just knew it was all fundamental. What I taught Alan was basically how his brain works in the context of the behavior of reading, and then as I did everyone, and then we just aligned how they read to how this instrument works. And then that's not hard to do. But what they went and did with it is like, I don't know.
Yeah, so that's the personal part of it, huh?
Yeah, I don't get I don't have a network. So I never wanted to have a fan base, and I never wanted to have followers, because if you have that, then you have to keep doing the same work over and over again. You never get time to actually get smarter. So, yes, I have friends who will kill me for sometimes not getting out there and making it bigger. And, but that's just a personal choice for me. But, I'll get unsolicited messages. I had a guy who wrote me and said, I don't know if you remember me from this course. And fortunately I did remember him. And he said, back then I was just a struggling soldier. I didn't really have an education. I didn't think I'd go forward. But after your course, I enrolled in university, got my degree, became an officer. And he was like the head of the leadership college in the Australian Defence Forces.
Wow.
I have another guy who became the mediator between the Dalai Lama and his audiences.
Really? Wow.
The stories are extraordinary, but they don't. It's like, thank you, that's really cool, but I don't do anything. I don't even publish any of that. I don't. If it comes up as a point in a lecture or in a book, I'll tell a story. But if it's not going to make a point that helps someone else, it's like, that's just gratuitous. I don't have mental capacity other than the smile I get out of reading that, and the really so grateful that they were able.
Hey friends, the audio cut out there for a minute. This is me from the future in the editing process. So unfortunately we lost just a couple minutes of the chat, but it comes back here. So it seemed like a natural spot for me to insert this little note. The conversation with Stephanie was really awesome. We did it a while ago. It's maybe obvious, maybe you could tell by some of the things we were talking about, that this is kind of an older interview actually, but we were holding on to it until her new book came out, which is The Beginner Years, which has now been out for a little bit. Awesome book. I've been reading through it myself and really enjoying it a lot, finding it very applicable to not only bagpipes, but to a lot of other things that other music that I play myself, but also to helping other people to learn to play music and learn to get confident to get out on stage and stuff like that. So really cool book. Goes right along with the others she's written. It's also excellent. So there will be notes in the show notes, links in the show notes. But if you go to stephanieburns.com, she's got a link there that's just my books, and it's just got all the books that she's written. I have at this point now read through a few of her others that aren't bagpipe and drum specific as well, and they are also excellent. So, maybe start with those bagpipe and drum ones, and then move on to the others. They're all really great. She's a cool person, as you can tell from the interview here. Other just standard notifications, just keep in mind that you can always leave the show positive ratings and reviews, and we're always going to appreciate it. If you want to support me via Patreon, go to patreon.com/DroningOnPodcast and send money. I'm not going to say no to that. And buy stuff at bagpipeswag.com. If you got a pipe band or a folk or trad group, or just a personal Celtic music kind of trad music, bagpipe music, anything that's like reasonably tieable to bagpipes, let me know, and I can help you get set up selling your merch on there, and you can make money too. But then aside from that, there's just cool stuff on there to buy as well. What else? Social media. Follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, droning.on.podcast, at DroningOnPodcast, that kind of stuff. You'll find it. There's links down there. Why am I wasting your time here? Let's get back to talking with Stephanie. Bye-bye.
My little book here. that was done for the third book coming out. When we talk about adults learning faster than kids, right?
Yeah.
And I have all the theory behind that and all the stuff. And I thought, I'm going to need a visual representation that this is true, right?
Yes.
What
yes.
can I do? I can't.
You got to back it up.
I can't play music. I got to back it up with something. So 2.5 now, almost 3 years ago, I thought, I know something I always wanted to do was be left-handed. And I mucked around with it when I was younger, but I didn't have the patience for it. And I thought, that's it. So I did 15 minutes a day with left-handed writing. And in the book, I talk about the things I knew about this, in the sense that you can't engage your mind in thinking about what to write and write, because you can't do that 15 minutes a day forever. It's like you go crazy. So I knew I needed to copy things just like a kid. I knew I needed to write larger. I knew I needed to write with something sticky like a pencil or a text.
Oh, sure. Instead of a ballpoint.
Instead of a ballpoint. I knew all that. So I started off on this little thing, and I did that. And then after 2.5 years, my handwriting is not too bad.
No, what I just saw, it looks better than what I can do with my right hand.
I know. It's better than lots of people. It's better than any doctor's going to do with their right hand.
That's for sure. Hey, let's set you a higher bar than that.
And so in this section of the book, and I'm talking about kids learning faster than adults learning faster than kids.
Yeah.
Now kids are phenomenal learning machines. They're learning everything,
right.
But it's very diffused. But if it's about a skill you have to learn step by step, adults are going to outstrip kids. So anyway, so in this book, after this thing, I had a picture of the first page of writing I did, and a picture of the 2.5 year as a side by side to compare them, and a little note. And I send that off. I have 2 readers, Zeph and Nickel, who's up with SFU, and a mate of mine here who's followed my work forever, who plays piano. And they read all these little segments. And both of them wrote back and said, "You are absolutely mad. Who spends 2.5 years every day so you could maybe," because I didn't even know if it would work, maybe use this as a demonstration in a book you didn't even know, you hadn't even mapped out yet. I said, well, that's me. They go, you're nuts. But you can't go, I want to do this, and then decide, and then in like 3 months do it. It took 2.5 years to get that enough experience with the left hand. But what it isn't the 15 years that it takes a kid to do the same thing. Yeah. I also have a photo of a 7-year-old's handwriting so I can compare, right? Yeah. This is a 7-year-old. This is me after the same amount of time. Anyway, so I'm a little crazy about that. But that feels like such a good distillation of like what I feel like happens so often as I read your books, is that like there are so many underlying assumptions. Like a fish doesn't know if it's wet, right? There are so many underlying assumptions that I don't even know to question them unless somebody calls my attention to them. And so it seems ridiculous for you to say that an adult could learn something better than a kid or faster than a kid, right? Because of these assumptions I have. But then when you do break that down, then I can think to myself, oh, well, yeah, of course an adult could learn to write left-handed more quickly than a child could learn to write right-handed, because, the adult already knows the alphabet, already knows how to spell, like already has gone through the experience with the other hand. So like, it makes so much sense. Why did I ever question this in the first place? I know. And I feel like it's that way with so many other concepts, whether it's memorizing or even like you have this interesting way, Stephanie, of like sort of like separating things into entities that I had not previously separated out. Like you talk about how like, even in this conversation, you mentioned how like science will keep you alive, but science doesn't care what you do with those years, right? Like in your books, you'll talk about how like time will keep moving. Time doesn't care what you do. That's right. It's just going to keep going. And in a similar way, you talk about how like your brain is this thing, like, is it a tool? Whatever it is, it's this thing, and you need to tell it what to focus on, Yes. And like, wait, for me, I've been this homogenous thing all my life, right? From body to brain to soul, whatever, everything's tied together. But breaking that way of thinking is what unlocks the ability to go like this. You said it's like you want to treat it's like you suggest we treat our brains almost like they are babies, right? So like if we're playing our music
and we get to a difficult part of the music and we mess up on the reverse tackum or something. And we go, dag nabbit, I just screwed up on that reverse tackum. You say, now your brain is going to pay attention to that. And for me at first, I'm like, what do you mean my brain's going to pay attention to that? I am my brain, But then you say, no, don't tell your brain to pay attention to that. Instead, when you get it right, clap for your brain like it's a baby, But I've got a baby, right? And so here in my house, and so I can see that behavior externally. I can see that like when he does bad things, he's too young to like understand language. Right, exactly. But if he does something well and I clap, he loves that and he'll do it again.
Yeah. Listen, your brain needs direction. And, so you have different parts of the mind that are engaged here. And most people, one, they don't know that they have control. I would even say in the last 5 years, the dominant thing I've been thinking about and working with is mind control.
That sounds like you're going to take over the world.
No, not controlling your mind, but teaching people how to control their mind.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
When they are engaged in some sort of activity, because the brain needs direction. It needs the big part of you. See, like your brain doesn't care if you play pipes or not, and it doesn't care if you get better at pipes or not.
Yeah.
And it doesn't care. And if that's like stressful and taking a lot of effort, your brain's going to go to its default, which is basically just taking away stress and keeping you calm, which means putting you in front of the TV. It's like, procrastination is really normal. It's just the brain going, ooh, you're going to be expending more energy than I think you should. And so let me give you a reason. Let's practice tomorrow kind of thing.
Right.
I'll do that. So you need to have a part of your mind that has been trained to assist your brain in keeping you in the game. And that, I wish I could send you the third book now. It's almost done. I'm tempted when I get the manuscript finished, maybe to send that over to you because I think you'll keep it private, but you'll love it because all of these things we're talking about now, they're touched upon because of the specifics of the content of the other books. But this book is all about that. Yeah.
That is so exciting. Whether it's when it's published or not, I'm definitely going to be in line to get a copy. It sounds
very, very exciting. Now. It is. It's been a difficult book to write because now you're writing about very complex things and having to get them to, like when you say to someone, you can't just say to someone, adults learn faster than kids. You get the boot off the stage. Their mind will give you 100 but. Can't do that.
We're all sitting in the cave, Stephanie. You're trying to come down into Plato's cave and say, hey, the sun is shining out here. And we're like, no. We're fine. We've got shadows. You're crazy.
Right. I know, exactly. So, for me, in order for me to say that line, the setup and getting agreement of their brains of certain things to be true based on the evidence in their own life.
Yeah.
To be absolutely nailed, no wiggle room in order for me to say that line and for them to go, that makes sense.
Yes, I feel like that is the experience over and over again reading
this stuff. It is.
It's like once you get to that point, I go, yes, that makes sense. And then I turn and look back and I realize she just held my hand for 25 pages because I would not have been ready for it otherwise. She led me here. Right.
And I will, and I trust that I can write in a style that people will pay attention and be entertained and, be kind of thinking as they're reading. Like I said, my books are not novels. So they're really, that's why, the writing style is so narrative. And it's like, people have heard me speak. Oh, geez, I can hear your voice in the writing. I've had people say, I've only read your books. And the minute you opened your mouth, I knew it was you.
Yeah. Yep. I've had exactly that experience because I'd read several of your books before listening to any interview with you.
Yeah.
And so after having read, then I listened to the interviews and it's like, well, I was surprised you didn't have an Australian accent. That's the one thing that was a surprise because I'd been assuming all along.
I'm working on it. 35 years. I'm still working.
Keep it up. You'll get there. So now I've had you for an hour, Stephanie. Are you feeling, am I encroaching too much on your time if I ask you a couple more questions about yourself?
No, if anything, what you're doing is distracting me from all the stressors of the floods in Ukraine and life. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I would even venture to say I needed this today.
Well,
so thank you. I'm just going to fill up my water glass.
For sure. Absolutely.
Which is right behind me. So I won't be
go right ahead. No problem there. One thing. I'm back. So I have been curious, Stephanie, where so much of your work is about like learning. Well, okay. So I suspect this isn't just personal context. I suspect this is shared experience for a lot of people. But I had some wonderful teachers when I was a kid, but I had a few that I don't think it was a fault of their own, but I had some negative experiences that ruined formal education for me, for sure. Speaking of writing with your left hand, I was ambidextrous until I was in first grade, and I had a teacher who made me pick a hand, and I had to sit on my other hand so I wouldn't use both of them. And for years, I had a hard time writing. And I think it's because I picked the wrong hand, just things that made it real hard for me to respect the process, everything felt like hoops. And anyway, it makes me wonder, what kind of student were you? What was elementary school like for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Way back, casting my mind back centuries now.
Yeah.
And you're right. And by the way, just Great Lives We Live By is all about that. And it's not a teacher bashing book. It's more of a kind of the internal messages that we pick up as kids about ourselves and learning and our capabilities of learning that we then carry forward into adult life. So that book is to try to reset people's minds about what was true and not true based on the kind of message got as kids. So that will help. I think maybe you might.
That was already at the top of my list. It's just scooting even higher now. I think I need that book.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a kid, I wasn't a great student because I was just too active. My mind was very, I'd go to school. I just found it quite boring, the whole thing. School and some of the best, and I had great teachers, great neighborhood. Like we were just a bunch of feral kids, really. And I was just in a little egg with a bunch of feral kids. We were all unique. We lived outside. We were experimental. We were crazy. I mean, we would probably not have fit into any other environment than the one we were in. Yeah. And the schools, basically, the great teachers I had kind of recognized, at least in me, kind of this idiosyncratic way I wanted to learn. So, and if I wasn't doing what I kind of wanted to do, my mind was so fast that I was quite disruptive in class.
Yeah.
Rather than like squashing that, what I would get is they would bring in, say, an more advanced book on the subject and let me read it in the corner. So, I mean, I can remember in reading, I mean, I read at quite a young age. I was an avid reader. I wrote a lot. I would even copy books as if I were writing them to wonder what would it feel like if my brain had written that sentence.
But that's so cool, Stephanie. That's so cool.
Kid like that.
Yeah.
So I couldn't understand a technical trigonometry formula, but I would write it and wonder, what would that be like if I was the one writing this and understood what the heck I was writing here? So anyway, so the school would ordered this kind of progressive reading program that I could self-pace my way through.
Yeah.
Myself and another kid in the class would be just sent to the back of the room to basically do our own thing and then show our work to the teacher. And I had that all through school. Even in high school, math and getting into technology was getting very big. And there was me and another guy. And, other than the required English course, all of our courses were math courses in high school. So that's all we did. And the school just kind of accommodated these. And like I said, we were all nuts kids. I mean, we all went off to do really fascinating things with our lives. And I think it's because we were just protected and I only had maybe 2 bad experiences through school. And really it was the teacher who got punished for those, not me. Because as soon as we went home, I can remember one of them, my father said, sometimes some teachers are jerks. It's like, get wise about who you take input from and who you take feedback from. And sometimes the teacher is the jerk and this is not about you. And that, like I said, that probably only happened twice in my whole childhood. So I was very blessed too. And my brothers, same thing. They've gone off to do just unbelievable. I mean, they're smarter than me. They're funnier than me. incredible. And we all came out of that little egg, so.
I do imagine like the Thanksgiving gatherings would be a lot of fun.
Oh, they're hysterical.
If they're anything like you.
I brought a friend of mine back to we were separated quite young and then only came back together in maybe after about 25 years.
That's you and your brothers.
I went to a Thanksgiving dinner maybe 5 years ago or so. And it was the first one since like the 1960s where we'd all sit together.
Wow.
And I brought a friend of mine and I had said to her, you're going to love my brothers. They are funnier than anyone. And she said, no way. You, Stephanie, are the funniest person on the planet. Your brain works so fast. Well, I'll tell you something and you'll hit it from another angle. It's just floors me. So anyway, we're in Phoenix with one of my brothers and in the car, and my brothers are bantering about something. And she looks at me and she said, you're right. They are so funnier than you are.
Well, so then what was the home environment for you? Because it sounds like your parents were really encouraging and helpful in like allowing you to pursue anything you were interested in.
Kind of, yeah. I think that's a great question. And that's a deep subject. But I mean, in the main, certainly the early childhood up to about 14 was good. I mean, we were a generation that was left to our own devices. And, you were out and older kids took care of the younger ones and the older ones than you took care of you as far as just making sure you didn't kill yourself. And that was really the rule. Come home for dinner and not be dead. And don't
make it home alive. Yeah.
Make it home alive. And whatever you did in the meantime was kind of up to you. My parents both were a relatively poor family. They both worked a lot. And so they weren't really around. My father was more the one that would intervene with life lessons, wisdom, creating space for me. My mother, I don't remember much. She was quite an emotionally unstable kind of character. So although I don't have any bad experiences with her when I was younger, she was less present because you had to be able to read her emotionally very quickly in order to, like you couldn't come home from school and go, woo, look what I just did, because that you could be excited and that might make her angry, you see. So she was just a bit touchy.
Sure.
And then my teenage years, my parents had divorced. My mother remarried and moved us to Arizona. And that separation from my father was quite traumatic, I think, mostly in a way that he wasn't there to mediate her in the family situation. So me being the oldest at 14 was kind of trying to take on the role of mediating this kind of wild character. And I was just not mature enough or whatever. So ultimately I left her at, I think just after my 15th birthday, quite dramatically, being handed a suitcase and $100 and ended up flying back to Connecticut without my father's knowledge. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even there at the time, to see if he would take me in. And that was a major traumatic period. And he was willing, but unable. And, it was just an absolute mess for a period. But anyway, that created the separation between me and the boys for quite some time. But I did live with him through in high school with his second wife, which was, thank God, it was in a little caravan, 34 feet wide for 4 years. So there was lots of philosophy, lots of talking, lots of learning, lots of connection. And, his job was basically to keep me safe for those 4 years and get me, kind of on my way at 18. And then, the older brother, and then my father died. So that brought us together again, briefly, to at least be able to go, the things you've heard from our mother are not quite true. And so we kind of created this little secret, connection, unbeknownst to her. And over the years, then finally we were able to kind of break out and start hanging out together. And she's only recently passed away as well. I mean, she lived a long time. So there was like a 25-year absence since the three of us were together. And once we were together, we haven't been separated since. So, but again, that all had to be done quite delicately and secretively. And, so you have, all of us have lives that have, major interruptions in them. And I didn't plan on that one. I was a simple kid. I was a nerd. I played in the band, played sports, read everything I could get my hands on. I was a good kid. I had the friends in my neighborhood. I'd never learned how to make a friend. So I was well, I had all that going on. I became quite socially incompetent.
Yeah, because it was already built in for you. You didn't need those skills, right? They were already.
I didn't need any of those skills as a kid. And then when I did need them, I didn't possess them at all. Like not even a little bit. So, you know, but we all, and these things oftentimes when you're younger, 20s, 30s, you know, you're just so busy kind of focusing on what you're focusing on. And you don't really yet understand why you've made the decisions you've made, right? Yeah. It's like, you don't know the underlying traumas that are kind of floating your boat. Yeah.
Distance is needed for clarity sometimes.
Exactly. And so, you know, for me, I would have been in my 40s before I started really waking up to the trauma of those early periods and starting to really understand why, you know, why I didn't know how to make friends, I'm great on stage and I'm great socially and I'm really gregarious, but don't ask me to go to a dinner party.
Those intimate settings. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet I would try and I would fail and then I couldn't figure out what I was failing at. So I would just work all the time. Now that's all better now. I mean, I've been through 15 years of really slowly peeling away the layers of dysfunction in a highly functional life. You know, I've had an absolutely brilliant life. I mean, who can complain? I mean, look at the things I've been able to do and the people I've met and the contributions people make back to me is extraordinary. Yeah, absolutely extraordinary.
Well, like I say, you know, just the idea of talking to you directly has had me feeling, you know, quite even overwhelmed. Just because, I mean, you are such a polished professional. You know, not that that's always a marker of health, you know, but just
no, it's not. It certainly isn't.
But you know, and like I'm certainly not equipped to do some sort of psychoanalysis and figure out how all these things play together. But it does feel like, man, isn't it fascinating, even serendipitous, just the way, how much of this is nature, how much of it is nurture, life experiences, your personality from the beginning or not, that is all coming together and making who you are and what you produce.
Yep, and that's true for all of us. And again, you tend not to wake up to these things. It's like, for example, you know, working with men who have been abused as children through be the scouts or the churches or whatever. I mean, the time it takes for a man to tell a story like that is almost 30 years.
Yeah. It's
so they've lived, and for women, it's 24 years.
Yeah.
So because you're so just your brain's just into survival and it's just trying to keep you moving forward. And so it's our best idea is to bury that. But it still has an underlying impact on what you move toward and certainly what you then move away from.
Yeah.
And the experiences you just don't sign up for. And you don't know why you're not signing up for them. You can almost start making stuff up like, well, that's just not me or it's not something I really enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and then you start waking up going, holy smokes.
Or even I'm bad at that or something like that.
Exactly. There are some really underlying features in those events that we had as young people that have long dramatic effects. Now it's changing a bit now because at least certainly here in Australia, and I would say also in America in some pockets, where younger abuse survivors are talking earlier. Coming out with this earlier.
Yeah.
You're not meeting like we've got a politician here who's a gay guy who, you know, he'd be my age, probably in his mid-60s, but he didn't come out to anyone, including his family, until he was like well into his 50s. So, you know, you figure, we all think, well, we can live with a secret, but okay, living with that secret has now surrounded you with bubble wrap of any kind of question or environment or anything where you get exposed.
Yeah.
So, you know, these people have cut. I just heard, and the only reason I'm bringing him up in that situation is because I just heard him speak the other night. And it's like, you know, that's 30 years of saying no to things that are, again, it's not the secret. It's all the other layers where you know, like they might be exposed. And like abuse survivors, like the men and women who were abused as kids, it's like you think about the kind of relationships they have, the truth they won't tell, the way organizer families being closed off to certain lines of inquiry. And then they start waking up to this. And it's brilliant to see them waking up and kind of gaining some sort of power now. But I do find, I mean, here in Australia, we've got a couple of young 20-year-old women who just broke the whole mold last year in coming out and with abuse situations. And they have really turned the country on its head with that. And so this next generation coming up now, I've got great hopes for them. Yeah. They're awake. They're smart. They're advocates. They are frustrated and angry appropriately. Yeah. You know, not that kind of advocacy in a way where we had advocates in the 60s, let's say around civil rights, but nobody had any power, right? There was just no bloody power. But these are in the main white kids. Not all of them white kids, but in the main people who will have power and who will be heard. Right. The people who are in these privileged positions to actually make a difference. Exactly. And unfortunately, it's that. Unfortunately, it has to be that, but it is that, and it is taking hold. And, you know, I watch the young people in Ukraine. I watched the 2013-14, the documentary Winter on Fire. I mean, if you want to see the movement of change in a culture, I think it's one of the best things I've seen and one of the best cultures in the world doing what they're doing at the moment. So I do have great hope for, you know, a time in the future. I think but things have changed since the 60s even. I mean, it's like time does things, and these things are slow moving boats. I mean, when I was a kid in my 20s, 30s, 40s, there's no way I've never told personal stories about my family or my experiences when I was young. Not ever. It's like that was off limits. That's why I'm on stage. Yeah. I'm on stage. I'm in control, totally in control. And I just set up people to never ask. People would say, I just was trained by you to never ask certain questions. I know nothing about you. Yeah, that's true. But now that's not true today. But my God, up until I hit 50, that was true. I've wondered about things like this before. Like, how much do we see the same pattern in an individual as they grow up as we see on a larger and slower scale for a society or a group? You know, like can a church be a teenager? You know, and 100 years later be in its 20s in some behavioral ways, you know? Yeah, that's I've never really thought about that, but I think that you're onto something. And listen, you planted a seed. I will definitely, my antenna will be up looking for that talk about that. Maybe. And so I don't mean to like drive you into going deeper, but I wonder, do you feel like, well, were there other motivations for you to go into the military, or do you feel like part of it could have been practicality, seeking security of some kind? For sure. Yeah. My dad was great. I mean, living with him was calm, and you know, I mean, the rule was, you know, I don't care what you do, you can always come home. You'll never be hit. I mean, that was the rule. And he lived by that. But it also was his rule that at 18, you need to go start living your life. You need to be out. And was the military like a practical way to do that? Yeah. I mean, he you know, it took about 4 months and I had jobs, but like in order to survive, I thought the only way that I didn't have any access to university that would have been known to me back then, given from such a poor environment. Right. Yeah. You know, there was just not even a thought that university could be possible. And yet all I wanted to do was live in the stacks in a library in a great school. And I was like, that's all I wanted to do. Put me in a box and let me read for the rest of my life. But there just was no pathway for me. So, you know, I thought, well, the only thing I'm going to be able to do here is work at the Big Pen factory or the Remington Arms factory and live with 5 other teenagers in a house because I can afford. And I thought, that's just not me. That's not happening. And then I just happened to walk into a shop so you have to get the timing. This is 73. So the Vietnam War just ended. Also the draft ended. So now there was not like a nationalized way of getting anybody into the military. So and the military maybe is kind of unpopular for a lot of people as well at the time. It might have been. Well, for sure, for wealthy people, it was always unpopular. And and during the Vietnam War, people didn't want to go because they figured they were going to die.
Yeah.
But it became an all volunteer army. Now, in doing that, they were able to pitch that what they were was an opportunity for poor kids to come in and get a start in life.
And so then were you just like, hey, that's me. I'm a poor kid.
Yeah, I saw a poster that said, Uncle Sam wants you. I already knew I wanted to do engineering. Yeah. And get into computers, which were just at that point starting to lift off. Yeah. And I saw a poster, Uncle Sam wants you to be a this, and this engineer. I thought, that's it.
You got me, Sam.
So I went home, talked to my dad. He thought it was a great idea. And then I took the tests. And then they came back and they said, listen, you've done great on all your exams, but unfortunately the engineering fields are not open to women.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So they said, well, there were like 128, 130 fields not open for women at that time.
Yeah.
And so they came back and they said, well, why don't you come in and we'll give you a different skill. And my first thought was, they're going to make me a bloody cook or something, right?
Right. Like, yeah. You'll be peeling potatoes or folding laundry or something.
No. So I said, no. But if Congress ever changes the laws, military ever changes the laws on this, call me because I'll be in. And
if it's ever decided that women can do math.
Yeah, well, and don't forget, it was black women who put, the bloody Apollo.
Right, exactly.
So, no, it's just women didn't get, and it wasn't really a bad thing. Don't forget, it was the Women's Army Corps was separate from the Army at that time. And it was a lot of the Women's Army Corps heads of that who really didn't want integration either. Because women in their model, based on being raised in the 1930s and 40s, were still about decorum and being dressed properly and serving your male, service. And that was the idea. But I was certainly an early adopter. There weren't a lot of women going in the military in these technical fields, but there were some. So I just said no. I said, if it ever changes, call. Went home, told my dad, listen, you might just have to support me for a while longer until I figure this out. But they called and they said, listen, Congress or the Pentagon has opened all these fields, I think all but 3 combat fields for women.
Yeah.
If you want in. So I would have been, if not the first one, at the first who entered the Signal Corps engineering, electronic engineering school. And I was great. I mean, I got along with the guys. They were like the boys in my neighborhood, and went to school, and I graduated number 1. And what was interesting there was in the Army, if you graduate number 1, you don't get to go do the job. Like, they wouldn't let me go be an engineer.
Is that how you got into instructing then? Is it because, I see.
Yeah, my orders came down saying you were going to be a whatever it was 34D something, a military instructor. Oh. And I thought, oh my God. No, this is not true, but it could have been true. If they'd done a psychological profile on me at that point, it would have said, Stephanie Burns should work in a closet with machines. Do not allow around other human beings.
Right. No human interaction.
No human interactions. Right. So that's where that story in the book comes from. Right?
Yeah. That's so interesting, because I've been wondering all along, Stephanie, as you talk about your childhood, it doesn't sound like you were interested in being a teacher when you were in school.
No.
And then you go into the military, you were not going into it to become an instructor. No. This was put in front of you as the only choice, huh? Like,
that's right. That's exactly.
And an ill-fitting choice at the time as well. Well, would you be willing, could I get you to read that part?
Oh yeah. You want me to read that? Okay.
If you're willing.
I'm willing. Now remember, I'm 18 years old. I look 12 at that point.
And were there any other women in your experience up to that point in the engineering program?
Nobody. And there were no students in my class. And I think there was one that came after me and a couple more a bit later. But
I've got to imagine.
There were other women like in the platoon doing other courses, but not my particular program.
Well, and not that like physical prowess should necessarily matter, but in a martial situation in the military, like who can deny that like how tall you are, how broad your shoulders are going to have some bearing as well. So not only are you the only woman in the program, very young, maybe look even younger, you're not a roller derby champ either, like
no.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to guess, what do you remember how tall and how much you weighed at the time? Like, you must have been diminutive compared to a lot of these guys.
5'7", and I probably weighed 110 pounds, 120 pounds.
So it's like, who's this kid, right?
Yeah, who's this kid? Who's this kid? Real kid. Yeah. And most of my students in my very first class, as the story goes, every student of mine I had all men in my first class.
Of course.
They were all bigger than I was physically. Every one of them outranked me.
Yeah.
And, they were just much stronger, but I was the teacher again. So there was this kind of balance of power in respect for military instructors is very strong. And I always said that, when I teach leadership courses, one of the things that came out of that, I always say, when a student would raise their hand who outranked me and was bigger than me, and these were men, right? Men.
Like men amongst men. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't wear ties, right? They have, they have weapons. And I said, I used to just have to stand and go to a parade rest and say, "Excuse me, sir, what did I do to cause your confusion?" Wow. Do you think about that for a minute?
Yeah.
What did I do to cause your confusion?
Right. Wow.
And then, what happens is they tell you, "I was with you till you were here, and then that example threw me off the cliff." Or I think yesterday I missed. They give me feedback, and then with that feedback, I'm able to do something with it. Now, what that taught me as an 18-year-old is that the students are fine, and they're not confused until I start talking. When they're confused, it points errors in my teaching. It's like a leader who might have a team of 10 people, and then 5 of them go off with the pixies and do something else. Leaders go, "Oh, well, that's because you're stupid or because you're this," or, we're accustomed to blaming other people.
Right.
My training was like, look at me. What did I do that caused that? And what could I do to cause it to be different?
Wow.
Now that one lesson alone, I have near built my whole career on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm constantly looking at me. If I'm working with a piper on a problem and they don't get it, I'm going, what did I do that caused that? Or what could I do to cause that to be different? And if I don't know, I'm going to go to someone like Jack Lee, or I'm going to go to Zephan, and I'm going to get more information, because it's not about them.
Yeah.
It's about what I'm doing and my lack of maybe having the skill, the teaching skill to support them, or the arrow in my quiver to work with them. So that all started by me being in this weird situation as an 18-year-old kid, standing up. And all these guys had come back from Vietnam mostly. They were mostly older, 30-year-old guys who'd been to Vietnam, and now they were getting retrained for other skills. So they were so good. I mean, these guys, they took care of me. Oh my God, Father. They were just, and I'll read the story and people will see that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember having a little twerpy kid in the class raising his hand every 10 minutes to ask me a technical question about something that had nothing to do with what we were doing, but just
kind of testing you. Yeah.
Just kind of testing me. That's just not allowed kind of thing. So anyway, I would answer his question. I tried every trick I had as a teacher to get him to calm down, and he never did. And I finally, he'd raise his hand and say yes, and he'd ask his question. And I'd say, "Excuse me, Sergeant Brown, would you answer this young man's question?" And Sergeant Brown's like 6'7".
Yeah.
Down, stands up, looks at me, looks at the kids, really embarrassed, going, "I'm sorry, Specialist Burns, I don't know the answer to that question." I said, "Well, that's fine, Sergeant Brown. You can have a seat. Sit down. I'll get your question later." He did raise his hand. "Sergeant Brown, could you stand up, please, and answer this gentleman's question?" I hear this absolute commotion out in the hall.
Yeah.
And I go out in the hall. Sergeant Brown's got him by his shirt collar, about 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah, hold him up off the ground.
Up against the wall, going, "If you ask one more question," and that was the end of that. Now, I don't suggest, terrifying students anymore, but
sure.
But
that's you using the system that you were in, right? So
and it was also, you're using as a teacher every trick you know. The only ones I knew were the ones I'd seen done with me in school, right?
Yeah.
And then when I ran out of those, then I went to, how did we deal with this stuff in the neighborhood? And the neighborhood was, you call on the biggest guy, to protect you.
Yeah.
That was my go-to thing. Today, I've got maybe 1,000 other strategies I might use. I'm not used to throwing students up against the wall anymore.
Got perhaps somewhat more precise tools to use today.
Yeah, it's true. but I have been a bit rough with a few of them who need to be rough. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, if you need to pattern interrupt something or break someone who's got, just is so stuck in their head, right? Go want to go, and then apologize profusely for it later. All right, let me read this thing. So what happened on that first training day? This is the first day I'm going to go off and I'm teaching a class in the military. I said I climbed the 3 flights of stairs and walked along the green hallway to my classroom. I entered the room, tables and chairs all in tidy rows, an instructor's podium at the front, computer terminals lining the walls. I knew nothing important I should be doing, so I waited. I checked that my instructor's manual was in order, and I double-checked that the reviewer's manual at the reviewer's chair was open at the proper section. It was the first hour of the first day of a 4-month course. I opened the windows to the sound of a drill session taking place outside and tried to remember my own experiences as a student in this very room, which had ended only 3 weeks before. I was shaking quite uncontrollably as the chatter of my students grew louder in the hallway as they waited for the morning bell to ring. I prayed it never would ring, and it did. As students entered, taking seats randomly, I fiddled with my notes and looked at myself in my shoes, because of course they were very shiny. It was quiet and attentive long before I ever noticed. My head was pounding. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My lip danced to some odd tune, and my knees moved spontaneously in directions knees were never designed to, making my skirt do funny things. As I looked up and attempted to speak, I began to stutter. Not for the first time in my life, but certainly at the most critically important. The harder I tried to control it, the worse it became. The only rational thought that came to mind, as silly as it seems now, was to write my name on the chalkboard. Without yet having spoken a single comprehensible word, I turned and walked to the board. I picked up a piece of chalk, and with every ounce of effort I could muster, I attempted to glide the chalk onto the flat surface. The next thing I remember is choking down chalk dust and hearing a rapid-fire clicking as the chalk slammed repeatedly into the board, shattering into thousands of little pieces. My name had been forever changed into something resembling shots from a machine gun still firmly ingrained on the blackboard at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. When I recovered some minutes later, turning to face my class, I discovered that my students, out of a mixture of confusion and understanding, had all respectfully left the room. I say this with all sincerity. Given I have gone on to become a well-respected, highly paid and sought-after trainer since that first experience, forever cemented in my mind is the belief that those with perseverance and a willingness to make all their experiences useful will without doubt succeed.
Thanks for being willing to read it. That part of the reason I wanted you to read it, Stephanie, was that, like, beyond anything else, when I read that, I felt like, I don't know if I was feeling for you in that moment or feeling grateful to the people who respectfully and, lovingly were willing to leave the room, or what all it was, but this humanized you and your experience in such a big way. And it's like, does opening up and sharing pain or trauma or even embarrassment, is that the most efficient way to get someone's trust? Because it sure seems to, like, if I hadn't read anything else, having read that, I would have been like, what does this lady have to say? I'm open to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you listen to all the speakers, or the people who influence you, the writers, the speakers, the teachers, etc., who you admire, I mean, one of the things that they do consistently is to tell the truth, and that can be the truth of the struggle it took to do something, and it can also be the truth of things they didn't struggle with, and what that, like, for example, if you were a student, or even if I were a teacher who did really well in the beginning, I would never have struggled then to learn things that made me a great teacher later.
Right. So being good at a thing doesn't make you a good teacher necessarily.
I mean, I often tell students when I'm doing leadership programs, it's like, if you read 10 books about great leaders, those books are all about failure.
That's such a good point.
They're all about failure.
Yeah.
It's their stories of what they tried, decisions they made, mistakes they made. And then on the back end of that are the strategies or ideas that they use to overcome that. I mean, if you read something from somebody who's going, I was great at this and good at this, and I succeeded at this, you can't relate because it's not life. I mean, nobody does that.
Yeah.
Anyone who's done well, I'm telling you, has beaten the path hard.
Yeah.
And fallen on their face, as many times as they've succeeded, for sure.
Yeah.
I think people relate to it. It's like when I do that, people love the stories. I mean, that's another big request I get, is to write my stories, which I just cannot seem to make myself do. Maybe I'm just not old enough. Maybe, in my 70s, I'll be clear-headed enough to do that.
Maybe that's the next 10-year project, huh?
Yeah, but they do. They love the stories. And it's not because I told it, it's what it makes their mind think in relationship to their own life.
Yeah. Yes.
And that is a very common theme.
We've all been there, right? I feel like this is part of why it's like there are several elements that need to come together here. One of them is you have to have good information, and you've got good information. Another one is that it needs to be presented in an, dare I say, entertaining, at least enjoyable way, Yeah. But another one, yeah, absolutely. And I think that a third part to this soup that makes it work well is that you've got to be genuine. And it's like, I never get the impression, Stephanie, that you are pretending to be some sort of enlightened guru who's enlightened by anything more pristine and miraculous that at least than just like real, messy, relatable human failure. Yeah. And you're willing to say to me, hey, look, my name's Stephanie and I have failed, and I've been really bad at public speaking. But see, I read that experience knowing that you have spent, have you calculated how many hours you spent in front of how many thousands of people, training them on computers or training them on how to train, and we're talking about military, broadcast stations, other government entities, massive companies, but you're willing to you're not going to let me put you on a pedestal, right? Because I see all that. You're going to say, yeah, but guess what? Before that, I couldn't even write my name on a blackboard, on this.
But see, I would say that only if in like working with you, mentoring you, you were having trouble writing your name on a blackboard. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like that story is not real. I rarely, if ever, tell that story because it's not relevant to the people I'm working with. Now, when we go to the fourth book in the music framework, which is performance, that story becomes important. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because now we're talking about that represents how people feel when they pick up their pipes and have to play in front of someone. That's exactly the point.
Totally.
And it's awful. It is a terrible, terrible experience. But the military, not them, but my environment of all men and me being me and me being heavily protected by my students caused me to be a good teacher. And I went on to build that skill over many, many years, but without working on it. I mean, one thing I should say, because I don't want to leave it out, is as a kid, for as socially as incompetent as I was always good in front of other people if I was in control. So, I was quite gregarious, and for being like a severe introvert, which I mean, I'm off the scale on the introvert scale. They don't even go that low for me on the introvert scale, or that high. But when I'm in a position where I'm telling a story or teaching or being on stage, that's not, I feel it, but that's my comfort zone. And I feel more me on stage than I probably do or did until I was 50 in any other context. Sure. So although it took me some time to kind of get over that initial bump of the responsibility of teaching, once I did, I became known as a great military instructor. And, still to this day, if I go to a conference, it's got 10 of the best people in the world, people will say, number one, Burns. Yeah. I go in to knock it out of the park, and, and sometimes I crash and burn, but, I'm in there to basically knock it out of the park. And the books are good representations of the character I am when I'm teaching, for sure.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Yeah. Well, I feel like maybe it's not fair for me to do this, but maybe to distill maybe like what a reader could be could expect to get out of what you're offering, whether that reader wants to ride horses or swim or play bagpipes or anything, would be that you say that it matters to you, Stephanie, that people have what they need to get wherever it is that they think they want to get to.
Yep.
And it feels like that's what you're doing for other people. And
that is absolutely it. It's absolutely it. It's the driver every day. I mean, my day, every day is different because I don't know what's coming in an email. You know, it could be a guy in Germany who's struggling with, learning a new score. I'm in that boots and all. Some of these might take 3 or 4 days for me to think about. Like I've got a gal in New Mexico who's a ex-military who was really struggling with her piping. I mean, just she was shaky hand. She couldn't understand what was happening in her hand. And I worked with her. I probably did 2 sessions with her over the phone. I did a lot of writing with her. And then when I realized, okay, I'm out of my skill base here, I turned her over to Zephan. And Nick picked her up and has been working with her now. And she's getting movement. I could get somebody who's got focal dystonia writing to me. I've got someone who feels they're too old. It doesn't matter. It's like that is what comes in. I don't solicit any of that. It's like, trust me when I say you can write to me if you have something. And if I can help, I will absolutely be in it, boots and all. That's it. But that's the motivation. I never wake up in the morning and go, I know what I can do. I can go help the world do this. Like that is just not a motivation for me. I want to wake up every day and do what I want to do.
Which might be more often than not read a book, right?
It could be study. It could be nutting out a problem. It could be reaching out to people overseas who are smarter than I am in a subject. My drum practice gets done every single day. It could be a lot of things. It could be in the gym every day. So I want to do what I want to do. That was my goal in life. I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with who I want to do it, where I want to do it, period. That was my model of success. And I've achieved that. But when I get a call from someone saying, can you do a learning strategy session for the Aboriginal kids who are going into a STEM school? Why not? It's like I never say no.
And you've kind of made a practice of diving in to situations that could present new challenges, huh? So I'd imagine they're appealing. Yeah.
At some level, there's no prescription. There's no I know the 3 things I'm going to say. I'm all in it by feel, and I trust. Like when I know where the kind of the dimensions of where the problem are, I just give that to my brain. I go, brain, get primed. Like bring up to the surface anything I might need to grab onto. Yeah. Like I coach a gal at a bank here who's moving into quite a senior level. And as she's moving, like she's extraordinary at the level she is. But in order for her to move to that next level, there are just some things she's never had to learn to do. But I go in there and go, okay, these are the 3 things that are going to make that possible. I don't know. Yeah. So, but I'm primed for pretty much anything I might get thrown that are needed in order to bump her along in that direction. You've kind of sussed out these principles that would be applicable, right? That be able to apply them to an individual situation. Exactly. And there's, and it's even like money. I would say 80% of all the work I do is pro bono. I would never think to ask somebody to pay for something like that because I don't know for sure it's going to work. For one, I might think so. And I invest tons of time. I mean, tens of hours for individuals, but then everybody knows I do this. So when there are groups that know me and they have money, then they pay. And, and they pay a lot. And so when they pay a lot, it enables me to stay home, do what I want to do when I want to do it, go where I want to go, and be freely available for people that don't have 2 nickels to rub together. Right? Yeah. Which is a lot of people. There's no way I'm not going to do something when requested. Hence, I'm here with you. Right. Yeah. I'm one of them. Right. And that's one. I hope that folks will forgive me if I started turning this into kind of a personal coaching session, because honestly, Stephanie, a lot of the things that I ended up asking you about are things that are very prevalent in my life right now. Well, listen, that's fine. I was very open to, I knew you wanted to kind of explore the past, but I also trusted absolutely that you would read certain things that you would see, that you would prime yourself for this might go. So you could be spontaneous with me and trust I'd be spontaneous with you. We certainly haven't tried to nut this together into lessons, but I can already tell you there's 6, 7, 8 things that have been said that hopefully will stimulate people to be thinking within their own life and within their own. Well, we haven't bloody talked about piping or drumming, which
I know.
But see, pipers and drummers are human beings, right?
Yeah, that's my hope. It's like we're still talking about human things here, right? So it's okay.
Yeah, but see that, but they're human beings, and it just so happens their challenge is piping and drumming.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the challenge is. They're just, I don't need to be specific about that.
Yeah. Well, and
in this case.
And this, maybe this is where the plug is for the book. So like, I would imagine a lot of listeners probably have read at least one of the music books so far. And so, I'll have links in the show description to places where these can be found. Do you have a preferred way to have these books purchased? Just anywhere.
I mean, if they're, depending on where they're located, like Tartantown has it up in Vancouver. I'm happy if people within their community, pipe band community, carry the books.
Yeah, support your.
It supports them.
Yeah.
I use Amazon as the distributor simply because, people in 40 countries are buying the book.
Right, it's everywhere.
And so it's the only thing I can do that gives people access. I can't do that from Australia. They can't order the book from me. Like if someone local called and said, a local band called and said, can we get 10 copies? Yeah, I can. But I can't get them here and then ship them over to France. I mean, that's the old days. That's like the old days.
Yeah.
So any plug you get for the books helps a lot because it helps them. And also if you put it in the hands of someone in a different pipe band community, it helps them then spread it through that community. And that's the goal, is to get it in the hands of anyone who might need it. And that includes Move Closer, Stay Longer and the other books as well. So yeah,
I think Artistry in Training might be one of my favorites, really.
Really? That's really good you said that, because that was out of print for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't have a way to get it out there because that had been done by a publisher, and the publisher had the rights to do all that, and been dormant for maybe 5 or 6 years. And then I got an email from a friend saying, I just tried to find a copy of Artistry in Training, like a used copy. I found one on eBay for 457 euros.
Well,
and he helped me out here. Yeah. So I sent this gal a PDF of it and said, just take this. Anyway, that inspired me to get my designers to basically knock the thing together and put it up in instant print so that it can be purchased now, and has been probably for the last, maybe decade or so. Yeah, I just, some things you do, like all the learning to learn guitar stuff. Yeah. We're talking 100 hours of teaching that was all recorded. Mm-hmm. And I kept that going as long as we had on videos. Then it went to DVDs. Then I loaded up the DVDs online and I cut them into like little 3-minute segments. And I wrote all the top and tail with all of the new things I'd learned over the years.
Yeah.
It was brilliant. And eventually, the technology changed. I couldn't maintain them on the platform. And that work is just gone.
Yeah.
Gone. I have a transcript of the written stuff. And that's it. And a photo of me and Roy Clark. I mean, that's like, that is all that's
Those left. Are the relics that are left. Oh, man.
Of, really 20 years of work on that. So, I try. I have a copy of some weird stuff. Roy Clark and I did a 1-hour learning to learn guitar program, which I was so resistant on because you can't teach anybody anything in an hour.
Yeah.
But I was convinced to do this thing. With Roy, and I do have a copy. It was a lot of fun. I flew from Sydney to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
To meet with Roy Clark in the studio. We did it in a day and had a ball. But is it quality education? No.
No. It's a lot of fun to do, but yeah.
And I get asked to put a lot of things, like people will produce things that are weak educationally, and they'll ask if I can insert kind of a front end piece to teach people how to take best advantage of what is there.
Sure. Yeah.
And a story I hadn't really told much because it never was relevant, but I'll tell you here because this will spread it around America. But I did get a call from a guy, I had a marketing guy I'd worked with for years in Australia. He was in the States, and he said, listen, we're doing this, Donald Trump's they're going to be doing an online university, or a university, Trump University.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And the materials, which were I think they were 5 DVDs of content experts on wealth creation. And Donald Trump was doing this thing on the front end. And the guy who's had known me for 25 years, he said, listen, there is no way anyone's going to learn anything from this. Can you have a look at it and see if there's some way you can either put a wrapper around it or insert something to prepare people so that what is of value here can be gotten out of this thing.
Yeah. Like, and basically, can you make it good, Stephanie?
I couldn't change. And I've done this for lots of companies, and it's I never judge what it is they're doing, but if I can somehow assist the buyer or the user or the student, I did it for Cisco Systems as well. It's like, can I insert something that assists the user of it on one basis in their own life, take better advantage of what they have. Yeah. So anyway, I happened to be in Pagosa Springs, Colorado for the summer on the horse thing, and they were in Phoenix, and I said, I'll take a look, and we did. So we did, what did I do? I did a DVD, which is in the box. I can't believe I'm in a Trump box. I'm right next to Trump. I can't believe it. 1 degree of separation. I wrote a workbook and a study guide. Yeah. We did a 6-part podcast in teaching people how to learn from that kind of media. And I wasn't paid for any of that. So that was just like, let's try to make this.
Wow, really?
Well, because when something is kind of bad, really bad, you don't really want your reputation hooked to it for having been paid to be involved in it.
Right.
I don't think I was thinking that thought, but certainly 15 years later, I'm thinking that thought.
Yeah, is it kind of like,
and then it went on. Then they did the online, the Trump University online, and I got asked by Trump doesn't run any of that, but the guys who were running it, if I would do an analysis of that. And I took one look at it, and it's kind of like any of these hypey promotional grifting things, right? Yeah. I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this well. I had a gal who worked for me who was brilliant at that stuff. So I said, I'll put her on it. She enrolled as a student, went through the Trump University stuff, and then wrote an analysis. And she finished that report because I was doing stacks of stuff online, testing how to be an effective educator online. In some cases, better than you could be live. Yeah. And we were very successful with that. So we had all of the structure and theory. So anyway, she writes the report. We send it off through my guys over to Trump. And of course, we never hear a word back because it was scathing. It was absolutely scathing as being just an absolute grift. But when the whole Trump University thing came up, like in 2015, 16, I thought, dear Lordy, don't have them call me. That's fine. Like, I really do protect my privacy here, right? Yeah. It's like, no, I don't want to do, if this report pops up, I mean, it was all dot for dot for dot for dot for dot of what they were doing to scam people. Yeah.
And you didn't want to see at the bottom of that page,
I just didn't
with Dr. Stephanie Burns.
That's right. And that's what it said. And it's like, like I said, it was so clear. And fortunately, the case went through and, the reconciliation was done. I mean, there certainly was a period I went to, should I expose this? Because I'm sitting on it, but,
kind of get ahead of it, maybe.
Gathered my people together and, they said, listen, this is probably not wise to do that but you may be asked, and then we'll prepare you for that. But so, you never know where a career is going to go. Yeah. And you never know where you're going to end up.
I've been Googling you a lot the last few weeks and nothing has come up about Trump University. So you're safe.
No, I'm safe. Yep. But don't put it out there now. The nice thing is that, I really have played kind of Where's Waldo for sure. Yeah. If you want me, I'm not hard to find. Yeah. Right? I'm not. It's easy. But I chose, because I was so in the public eye in my 20s and 30s, I mean, massively in the public eye. Mm-hmm. And what I learned was I didn't, one, have the temperament. Two, I realized there's nothing I can say in a 3-minute interview that makes any sense to anybody. Yeah. when you have people following you, when you've got 100,000 students following you, you don't get any work done. And 4, they keep wanting you to do the same work over and over again. I don't want to write a book and then have people say, can you come in and give a lecture on it? No, that's why I wrote the book. Go read the book and then ask me interesting questions based on what you did with the book. That interests me.
Yeah.
If you go into the public eye and become a personality, you have no hope of growth in your own work. Your reputation takes a pounding. Sure, you might be popular and you might sell 1 million books. But who gives it? I don't give any, credence. I don't want that. That's not interest. I might sell 1 million books, but not by that method.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would have had to become the horse lady or the bagpipe lady or the ballroom lady, and so then these other things wouldn't have been able to happen.
It's spot on. That's absolutely a true statement. And because in my 20s, I became very successful very quickly in the emerging Apple, Microsoft, Compaq, you name the computer system, I was involved in it as the teacher of the major corporations. And then I was the spokesperson at the big computer conferences. So you went to any of those mega conferences with 50,000 people, when you'd walk in, it would be say computer college. And that was me. And I would do 4 2-hour lectures a day for 4 days in a row to people who were coming in off the street, really curious about what all this stuff was about, but they didn't know anything. So my job was to educate the population who was looking at this. Well, then it was like the computer lady on the commercials on TV. Then it was interviews week. Then it was, and when you're 20s, you think this is cool. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. What else could I want?
It's not for me. It just isn't me. It's just not, I will be happy to be. My dad once said to me, the first thing when you were getting to be about 10, I asked you what you wanted to be, which is a question you normally wouldn't ask because he didn't want to plant any seeds in our head about what to be. And like you go be anything. And he said that I answered by saying I wanted to be anonymous.
Really? As a 10-year-old?
As a 10-year-old. I wanted to be like an encyclopedia, and I wanted to carry a briefcase, and I wanted to earn the right to be interviewed by Johnny Carson. Those are like my 3 things, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't, anonymous. So how prescient was that? And of course, I screwed that up in my 20s and 30s, or early 30s, for sure. Yeah. So overexposed. And, I taught 7 years, all the learning stuff, and that was near about 260 days a year on stage. That's morning and nights, plus all the guitar stuff. And I woke up after that period one day, and I used to joke the only way I knew I was home was because all the plants were dead. I just lived in hotels, and that's all I did all day long. And and you get people in, and you still have 300 people the next weekend, all of whom were new. Like I thought, this on 100, and I'm never going to run out of people. That's not, and I thought this is not good. But the big realization I had after that period was that I was not one day smarter than I had been 7 years before. I had not learned anything new. I just was like doing Evita 7 days a week.
Yeah, just spinning the wheels in the same spot, huh?
Yeah, and navigating with my producer promoters to get out of that. I mean, that was quite a period of time to do. And when I got out of it, the first thing I did was, when started doing the online stuff, but I went back and did the PhD because I just needed time to study and get smarter and think about things and solve problems, because problems were popping up with students learning. I didn't have any time to on them, and they
you couldn't address them because you had another conference to do, but that conference was going to be exactly the same as the one you did the weekend before, so it's not fulfilling for you.
Yep.
I begin to see how it would be appealing to shift to a model where you create the course or write the book, because then you can distill this stuff you keep addressing it, of course, for groups, but you can go deep one time and say, here it is. Yep. You interact with that. I'm going to go learn to ride horses.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's why, Great Lies was the first thing I wrote. And I wrote that because I was leaving the teaching of learning to learn And I wanted to leave some sort of artifact behind. Now, again, today I could write that book much. It's a good book and people love it and I get lots of feedback on it, but I know I can write that book better. And then I continued doing the Training to Train program because that was only like done in 3 different cities once a year. So I kept doing that. And then when I knew for sure I was leaving that, that's when I wrote Student Training. So I'm always trying to at least leave an artifact of what I've already created behind, but that's really just giving me selfishly permission to go forward to do other things, right?
But it feels, I can see how it would feel like a bookend somehow, like not that you ever leave any of these things entirely, right? But like to some degree, like the intensive period has now reached a close and it's time for a new project. Or
that context. Like I still learn and training to train type stuff, but it's in a very, very different context now. And you're grabbing onto salient pieces to put together a new program.
Future me again here at the editing board. Just had another breakdown in audio here, and it's another natural spot for me to insert this quick little note that I didn't mention before. This book, The Beginner Years, Learning to Play a Musical Instrument, by Stephanie Burns, is going to be the Patreon giveaway this month. So I'll be doing a drawing. All of the show's Patreon supporters will be in that drawing, and otherwise supporters too. We got one good friend who just sends a check into the show. We'll take your money in any form. We don't mind a bit. But I'm going to do a drawing. The winner is going to get a copy of this book. So if you want to be in that drawing and other drawings that we do, just hop over to patreon.com/DroningOnPodcast and support the show. Also, going to try this experiment. I've been threatening to do it for a while. We're going to do a book club. So hop over onto our social media stuff, and you'll see some announcements about it. As of the release of this episode, we'll take 60 days. Anybody who wants to participate, grab a copy of this book, read it, and we'll discuss. I don't know how best it's going to come out. We'll see if it happens mostly, in chat form on Facebook or via email or what. But just any questions you have for Stephanie that come up, questions that, existential questions that come up in your mind, thoughts, insights that come up during the book, even things that you might disagree with possibly, or, if you have contrary experiences, and then we'll pool those all together. And I'm hoping to be able to get Stephanie back on the show again, and we can pull from our book club experience to, kind of give these questions and thoughts to Stephanie and give her a chance to kind of interact with them. If I can't get her on, she's a busy lady, so if not, then somebody from that same book club probably, or a panel of people or something will get together and discuss a few weeks thereafter. But if you want to try out the book club, just look us up on the social media stuff. You'll see it. I'll put announcements and stuff around. So just a few minutes left of the interview. It was really fun. I could have gone on hours and hours more. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I did. Back to Stephanie. Bye-bye.
There's a guy named Harbinger. He's a podcaster. What's his first name? Harbinger. Great podcaster. But even he did a thing like about a year ago where he said, the problem is I can't promote this podcast.
Jordan Harbinger.
Say again?
Jordan Harbinger.
That's it. Yeah, Jordan Harbinger. So I can't promote this. I can't do anything because as soon as I do that, I start looking like every other podcaster who's just doing shit to try to make money. Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah.
And it's really hard. He goes, this is a real difficult thing. The things we're offering are of value, but I can't actually sell them or really even promote them.
Yeah.
And, and I went, whoa, here. I'm kind of in that same boat, but, it's the boat I chose. Maybe maybe when I'm 70 and 80, too old for people to give a shit about me anymore.
There you go. That's when
maybe time. I'll go and be big, go leave the artifacts behind when I'm no longer here to have to deal with the with the press and the people, because I'm good on stage for sure. I know that. I know when I'm on stage, I'm going to get, rave reviews and people wonder, why I don't do this and that and the other thing.
Yeah. Well, now not to lean too much into commercialism here, but just because I'm curious, and also no pressure if you're not sure yet, no pressure to say, but do you know about when we can expect that next book in the music series to come out? I
think it'll be in the next 3 months.
Okay.
So I'm just finishing up the last chapter now. Everything else has been fully edited. So I just have to finish those bits, get them to the editor, and then they go and they get digitally published. Mm-hmm. I've got to work on getting the cover because I want to change the cover, because the covers from the first 2 books, which was supposed to be a series of 4, is not going to work for me. So I have to sort that out. So I think April, the digital publishing will happen, which would mean a May launch.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that puts me 2 years behind, by the way. The only reason I'm this far behind is, well, I was supposed to come out in 2020, but at the next Piping Hot. That was my one a year. That was what I was aiming for. But with COVID, geez, COVID
that's thrown everything off. Yeah.
It's everything, especially my mental state for writing. And, there was too much going on for sure. So I'm slow and steady.
I'm just thinking, so here's what I was going to do. So I have a small group of Patreon supporters. And so every month I've been trying to do like a giveaway. So it's like an album by an artist I interviewed or something like that. So my plan was to just make the giveaway a Stephanie Burns book of your choice. And I was just going to send them a digital copy, but I'm thinking, so I was going to set this interview to release later in the summer, but I could keep an eye on when the new book comes out and release it that month, and it would be fun to make the giveaway the new book.
Listen, that would be excellent if we could do that, and absolutely excellent. And don't, given the length of this, if you get into this and you go, geez, there's a lot there, feel free to cut the thing in half or in thirds and put it out in pieces. So
I might end up doing that. The name of the show is Droning On, so we're only perfectly on brand if we go on and on.
That is so funny. That's so funny, because I could probably talk to you for another 4 hours. So it's like,
I would love to. Maybe we could shoot, if you feel like you have time, Stephanie, maybe we can circle back and talk again sometime. I would really enjoy that.
I would absolutely do that. You've been lovely to talk to, and you've been fully engaged, and probably that bit of nervousness and anxiousness is a good thing, because it just made you very present with me. So, I can get people who get nervous either to meet or to interview, and that gets in the way, but you kind of settled that down quickly, and I hopefully did a good job in helping you settle down.
You are very helpful. You're very accommodating. I do appreciate that.
Yep. And then, we're going to have a coffee or a meal or a beer. That's the price whenever I'm in Utah.
Deal. That would be great. That would be great.
Right.
So I will have the links for books that are already published in the show notes, and just anything else that feels applicable, I'll put it all down there in the show notes.
Okay. And give me like a couple weeks. I'll let you know when the book's coming. And,